Hello. Before we get started, I want to introduce myself. My name is Tim Andrews, and I've been an athletic trainer since 2016. Since then, I've been fortunate to work with a variety of patient populations, and I'm also in the Indiana State University Doctor of Athletic Training program. I grew up in Farmington, Maine, and I also grew up participating in alpine and cross-country ski racing, which when I became an athletic trainer, I decided to kind of combine my two passions and work. And my research interest is on skiing health and wellness. So to get into the DAT, so when we first started, one of the first things that we learned in the DAT was about patient-centered care, which I didn't learn that much about before. Specifically, the Picker's 8 principles of patient-centered care is kind of a helpful framework to kind of understanding what does patient-centered care actually look like. It needs to be fast, needs to be effective care. The care needs to be working in an interprofessional team. Care should also involve the patient. They should have autonomous decision, and we should be providing them different options. Clear care. We should also be providing education. The care should also involve family members and support and the values of people's culture. The care should also provide emotional support, empathy, respect, and we should really understand the environment that that person is in order to provide effective care, which really ties into a lot of what we understand about the Salem models, and really understanding that we need to treat and work with the whole patient. So when I started to integrate some of these principles into my patient care, I really was working on it, and I realized sometimes I was better at it than others. And specifically, with these areas, sometimes with certain patients, I had difficulty providing that patient-centered care, depending on what was going on with the patient, and I didn't quite know why. And so what I really identified was that one of the main missing elements was trust. When we had trust with the patient, and the patient trusted me, and we had an established relationship, that's when we could work together and provide those areas. And when I was incorporating these elements of patient-centered care, I relied a lot on some previous training. So I took a interviewing and counseling course in my professional program, which went over how to build a therapeutic relationship with patients and how to continue to have that throughout all of treatment and any interactions and counseling with them. So this has kind of led me to my presentation that I'll be talking about today, which I developed with Dr. Jessica Tidswell, going over the developing, trusting, and safe therapeutic relationships. So for our learning objectives, for this section of the lesson, we're going to be specifically focusing on learning about what a therapeutic relationship is, and really the principles and characteristics of it, and how to identify the environment that needs to be created to provide this therapeutic relationship. So first, by taking kind of a 10,000 step back, is what is the role of a healthcare provider? Throughout history, currently, what is one of their main roles? And when we look back in the history, and what we really see is that a healthcare provider is really a guide in being able to return a person to function. People develop and work best in a society, and they are able to grow and develop when they use those resources. However, injuries and illnesses sometimes prevent us from being able to work best in the society and support one another. So one of the things is that healthcare providers help us return back to their group. And they come to us in order for us to provide care and guide back so that they can return to the group, so they can contribute as much as they want to society and to their life and goals. So then getting to what is a therapeutic relationship and how does this play into everything? So a relationship is seen as therapeutic if it's about providing an environment for a specific change process, aka an intervention to get better or to improve or to return to their group. So this is definitely something that we see for the relationship between athletic trainers and patients. We're trying to help our patients get back to what they want to do. And so one of the key parts of a therapeutic relationship is it needs to have trust, understanding, and empathy. And really, when we're trying to help a patient, there's a lot of different elements of different ways and techniques in order to help them. But really, one of the main foundations is maintaining a strong helper-client relationship. When we have an initially great formed relationship that's therapeutic in nature, we need to sustain that throughout the entire treatment process in order to help our patients and do what they want to do, which is really based on building relationships. So really, how do we build relationships? How are we maintaining relationships? And this really brings the questions of how do we bond with patients? How do ATs bond with patients? And I think most ATs recognize that they need a bond with patients and they need to have a good relationship with them. But I don't think we always know exactly how to do that. And a lot of people have tried different techniques. Some people use a lot of humor and sarcasm. I know I have in the past. Other members of us, they try and integrate themselves as part of the team. However, different things may enhance some relationships, but can also cause negative consequences to patient care. And we should really be aware of this and really be thinking about this, is that what are we doing? How are we building relationships? And is it leading to any negative outcomes or negatively affecting our relationship with our patients in the short term and the long term? For instance, a lot of people use humor, but perhaps that humor can contradict or make a patient not think that you have their best interest in mind, which could then lead to them to not thinking or trusting you that they're going to get better or they're going to receive the care that they need. Other aspects is even though an AT may or may not be working in an athletics model, the patient may view AT as part of athletics and not about their care, and therefore not looking out for the patient's best interests. That patient subconsciously or consciously may not seek out care or disclose all of their needs to the AT because of their view of being a member of the athletics or the staff, or being in some way a barrier to return to the group or doing what they want to do. And so really, understanding what patients want in a therapeutic relationship is really closely tied to patient-centered care. And we should really kind of, look at these different things that they want to be taught on how to grow and set goals. They want to have the helper or the clinician should have good body language. They should look like they care and that they're paying attention. They should listen to me. They should maybe try and connect, and we'll kind of talk about self-disclosure later on and what that looks like and when to and not to do it. But, these are some of the things that we really need to kind of think about, that we should have care in providing options and having a shared decision-making. And also we're open for feedback and that we accept when a patient isn't satisfied. And just continuing that, these are just some elements that we really need to think about. Introducing ourselves, saying goodbye, those just some of the basics interpersonal things that really make a patient feel like they're being cared for and that we care for them. Humor can be helpful. The environment was set up so that that they could provide good care. The person looked professional, and the person recognized that my feelings were normal, and they helped calm me down. They also have a reputation. Is also something to think about. Being transparent is important, and also I think this is something that we don't always do, is really explaining how everything is going to work and explaining the whole process and being transparent in that way as well, about what can and cannot happen throughout the whole process. And also that the person just looks and appeared like they cared. So many of us may already display a lot of these things, and people may be coming to for you to help anyways, friends, family, other things. So it's important to recognize your abilities. Don't discount them as you eliminate some behaviors and try some new ones. Also recognize that this is something you always have to kind of think about, and being a reflective practitioner and really thinking about what's my relationship with patients. Do I have a therapeutic relationship? Am I maintaining the principles? And really think about that as we learn more about the therapeutic relationship. So now we're going to kind of talk a little bit about what the characteristics of a therapeutic relationship like, not specific to athletic training, but just in general. So one of the key things is that there's mutual respect. The patient respects the clinician respects the patient. That's the foundation. And one of the most important things is the purpose. So the purpose of the resolution of the relationship is to resolve the patient's impairments and to help the patient achieve their goals. It's not about the clinician. It's really just about the patient and what they want. It's a one-way relationship rather than a two-way relationship. The other part is that they're a team. Both the clinician, the patient, the whole network, they're a team working towards achieving the agreed upon goal. This is really important, and we're talking about trust, is if there's an understanding of what information will be disclosed to one another. It's established and emphasized throughout really the entire relationship what information can be disclosed, what will not, what's going to be kept secret, so that way that trust can be established. The next element is that both parties can understand that the relationship is confined to the therapeutic sessions and they don't overlap into each other's lives. If the patient, when we talk about that, they want to be a part of their group, any kind of reminder that they were deviated from that or were not could kind of have a threat to that therapeutic relationship. Also, the relationship can be terminated at any time, either by the clinician or the patient. So that's just something some foundation thing that is understanding that it can be terminated at any time. Once the goals are met, the relationship is put on pause until the patient needs help again. So really having a set point where we go, yep, we've met our goals. Let me know if you need anything else later on. So now we're going to talk a little bit about characteristics of an athletic training therapy relationship, and you'll kind of see some of the differences and requirements for really having high standards when it comes to creating an environment for a therapeutic relationship. So one of the key differences with ATs may be that the relationship may not just be specifically therapeutically based, such as some ATs have a teaching role, things like that. There's also a decreased threshold to seek care. Many settings have a person right there and present, so you don't have to go to a specific site, seek out a healthcare provider specifically in order to seek the care that you need. This may be different for each setting, but other elements include that there's a potential that there's no limits placed on the number of treatment sessions. That other settings, PTs, that it's fee for service, people come, and or there's a restricted number, 20 appointments, whatever. In many settings, that is impossible. Some settings, people are seeing their patients 2 to 3 times a day. The other elements are that AT is typically at a location after the goals have been met, which contradicts with the relationship ending formally. And then on the other side is that there may be a pre-established relationship prior to providing therapy, such as providing some preventative activities and things like that, that can also contradict in having a person there prior. The other elements is that ATs can be one of the only healthcare providers present in a location. And that the other thing is that they sometimes have direct contact and care with the employers or the manager, the teachers, the coach, etc. So having that pre-established guidelines, understanding that what can and cannot be disclosed to these people can help them understand that trusting environment. Otherwise, they see you interacting with people that are in their social network, and they may be subconsciously concerned about what they can disclose to you. Other elements is that a lot of ATs, like in my setting, I balance multiple patients at the same time. So I'm really trying to make sure I'm focused on each person and what their needs are. And also, theoretically, the relationships between ATs and the patient population or person can last a really long time. An AT in an industrial setting could start working in that setting at a factory at the age of 24 with another person that's also 24 working in the factory, and they could have that relationship until both of them retire. So just another reason why we need to have really specific and great standards when it comes to the therapeutic relationship. So one of the first things that we should address is ourselves as clinicians. And sometimes we hold unrealistic beliefs related to what we can actually be as a provider and what the relationship we can have or do. And there's a lot of different options, but we should really always be self-checking and seeing where am I not being aware of some of my own biases. And here are some common ones. And also ones that I've had myself. So sometimes we think that we need to be able to solve all of our patients' problems. That may not be realistic and can negatively affect the relationship. Just like we think that we also need to be, if the patient isn't doing what they need to do, or if they're not progressing, it's my fault. It's not, I'm not good enough. Maybe not. Having that awareness that we should always be improving, but we can't control everything. The other element would be like, if I care or if I have time or experience, I can do a lot. Maybe not. So having that awareness is important. So next we're going to be talking about roadblocks and really things to avoid. So one element that might be surprising is having a face of surprise. Surprise either through vocal or nonverbal communication can make a patient feel that their behavior or situation is a deviation from the norm. So we should try and reduce this by getting used to surprising situations to reduce the risk of nonverbal or verbal explanations of surprise. I have a very expressive facial expression, so it's something that I always want to be aware of. And so here are some common areas as well of just to kind of see where those surprise things look like and what that communicates to the person. The other thing will be really anything that sounds like you're talking down. If I've had patients say, I'm not getting any better, and my ego says it's their fault, it's my fault, maybe I react negatively. But instead, we shouldn't react negatively, and really should not react from the ego and just ask, well, what do you need? What else can I provide? Another element will be giving false reassurance. Patients sometimes ask or request when they will get better or want reassurance that their intervention will be successful. If a clinician makes assurance they cannot guarantee, that can disrupt the relationship. Premature interpretations. Maybe we haven't gotten enough information from the patient in order to actually create a diagnosis or to create a treatment plan. So being aware of that and being aware, have I collected enough information before making a treatment or evaluation decision? Sometimes it's easy to use too much medical jargon. So identifying a technical term for every issue can make a patient feel that their problems are trivialized. You're just like every other lateral ankle patient I've seen. That doesn't take into the account of who the patient is, what they care about, what they need. So we should connect in the evidence, but not making them feel like their values aren't important. We should bring in our own experiences and evidence, but not limit the patient's own experience and not limit them too much and placing them into a medical category. We can also use the teach-back technique to see, having the patients say what we've taught about them and what we've talked about them in order for us to understand, do they comprehend their definition and their diagnosis. And also just when you have a distinction between education and taking away who they are. We should also really be looking for nonverbal cues if we're probing traumatic issues. If a patient wishes to avoid a subject, we should, either through verbal or nonverbal, you can note it, you can do some reflecting, you can do suggestions that maybe we'll come back to it and we discuss it later, and asking permission or discussing the why behind why we're asking these questions can be helpful. But just being aware that by probing these issues and really seeking that out, that can make patients feel not safe. Every interaction with patients should be a good streamlined source of information, and they shouldn't get any interruptions, or we should try and reduce the interruptions of them being able to feel comfortable talking with us. So we should avoid some of these things, such as any ordering or commanding things for them to do, threatening, warning, those types of things. That doesn't create a safe environment. Even as far as giving suggestions, giving solutions, what I think you should do, incorporating those elements of patient-centered care will be helpful. Of involving them in decision making will be helpful with the therapeutic relationship. And once again, really any kind of lecturing, arguing, judging, these things are not, we want to stay away from. And one of the surprising things can be also praise in general. Such as you usually don't do this. These types of things, even though it may seem like we're trying to help them get better and move forward, can make patient feel, well, why am I being so different? What is different about this thing that I'm trying to do compared to other times? And really, all of these kind of things are really common in sport. So really understanding that maybe the feedback that we're providing to patients should not be the same feedback that maybe a coach or other member of the sport league gives. Other roadblocks include, once again, like the premature interpretations in analyzing or diagnosing in regards to emotional behaviors without knowing if that's actually how they feel. And we'll talk about some techniques later on about how we can use techniques in order to get this information out without telling them how they're feeling. Reassuring can be okay, and that's some things that patients want, but not reassuring them in ways the AT cannot guarantee the outcome. You will 100% be better within the next 3 days. When that doesn't happen, the patient may not trust the clinician as much. Other areas is just we should really just try and stay away from anything from the ego. Like, what have you done to try and do this? Why did you do that? Those are not helpful things and can attack a person's ego. So we should really kind of stay away from that. Even some why questions can make patients feel self-conscious. Also, distracting, trying to have them think in a different way can make patients feel that we're not listening to them or we're not really respecting their values. So another important part to now that we've done with the roadblocks, is really understanding the difference between friends and versus a friendly healthcare provider. So friends have no obligation in their contract for change. Friends may not need to elaborate techniques, or they just need support. And a therapeutic relationship is a contractor relationship to help the patient make changes in their life. Many humans have developed their helping skills through friendships, but need to make a distinction between the two. The techniques used to help friends may not be the same as a therapeutic relationship. Often each make assumptions of one another about what the relationship will be rather than outlining their expectations of one another. It's important to outline expectations, especially in regards to confidentiality. And if you haven't heard enough times, the therapeutic relationship is about helping the patient get better, and it's not about the healthcare provider. So it's a one-way street versus a two-way street. Whereas a friend relationship may not have that element, and it can just be about maintaining the relationship for having the sake of the relationship. That being said, we also don't need to be robots, and we can have some general facial expressions and be real people. Which goes into empathy, which encompasses both the healthcare provider and the patient. The clinician should communicate understanding to the client, which is different than sympathy. The client experiences empathy when the helper communicates that they understand the facts, emotions, and the special meaning of the client's story. And we'll get into that when we talk about reflecting and paraphrasing later on. We all come to interpersonal situations with cultural baggage and a worldview that contains biases of one kind or another. These show up in verbal and nonverbal messages. We may never be able to completely grasp another person's reality, and it's important that clients recognize that we are struggling to understand and that we care enough to try. Empathy is not merely supporting or agreeing with a patient, and sometimes we're afraid and don't really know how to do it. But it's important, and it can help patients examine their own feelings at a deeper level and make decisions that are more consistent with their own feelings and values. You can communicate understanding about the circumstances that created the problem without supporting or agreeing with the client's action. And also just making sure that we're not being sympathy or providing any pity. It can make us feel, if by providing pity, it kind of makes a distinction that there's like a hierarchy and the clinician is above the patient. So we want to stay away from that. The last part about empathy is that it should not be just one time, and we should have it throughout every patient interaction. So now we're getting to the next terms, such as transference and countertransference. And if you're like me, I have no idea what these mean, but they're actually really important to recognize when working with patients. So what transference is all about is refers to how a patient is taking their relationships and feelings from past relationships, and they're carrying over and applying them to the healthcare provider or the helper. Such as, a client may feel angry towards a male helper because of past abusive situations. And then in the exact opposite way is that countertransference is about clinicians or healthcare providers taking relationships from previous relationships and feelings and then applying them towards a patient or person that they know. So just having transference can just come about just from the relationship building and the relationship that is between a healthcare provider and a patient. So just by listening, providing conditions of safety, these types of emotion and feelings can come about. So as healthcare providers, we just really need to be aware of this and just kind of recognize the feelings and emotions that are coming from patients. Anything from things being very positive, from positive feelings and attraction towards suspicious, hatred, angry, just being aware, where is this coming from? Is this related to what I am doing? Is this related from previous relationships? What's going on here? And some people believe that transference is caused by like unfinished business. You haven't concluded or resolved that past relationship, and that can move on. And the other side is about cognitive distortions, or really just false thinking patterns or incorrect thinking patterns that may be false or irrational. One way to recognize this is the fact that patients may be overly thinking about or believing that the cause of their behavior or what they're doing is related to outside influences rather than things that are going on with themselves. With countertransference, we just really need to be aware of this, aware and mindful of our own emotions and reactions to clients. How are we feeling to different patients? Are we feeling like we need to protect them? Are we feeling anger towards them? Anger is common, especially related to if they're not getting better or things like that. So where is that coming from? It can also be about relating an experience with a past patient and their improvement, even though it may not be that specific and that they're not actually that related that much. So once we're aware of transference, what do we do about it? So we should convey acceptance of the client's remarks, but we shouldn't retaliate. And this is where it comes in with empathy and avoiding the roadblocks to communication. So we shouldn't retaliate or act defensive, and instead we should be empathetic, express understanding, and then explore those feelings. Encouraging them and helping them to label and identify those feelings and why they're feeling the way that they are about one another, where they are in the process, or about others. We can also utilize self-involving statements, which we'll get into later, which allows the helper in order to express our thoughts about them, but not retaliate or act defensive. And instead, it can help patients become more aware of their own feelings and convey understanding and empathy. The next part as well is we should use any transference or these feelings to help the patient find better ways of expressing these feelings while also meeting their needs and goals. And once again, this really comes back into avoiding those roadblocks. If we blame or embarrass or shame the client either through humor or through jokes or any kind of way like that, the patient's expression instead can be used to help them not in many dimensions of health and everything they need to get better and achieve their goals. So that's it for right now. We're going to be going a little more depth into the next part of the discussion, but I just want to say thank you for listening, and we'll get into it. The next step, please come with any questions or content that you didn't quite understand from what we talked about today. Thank you.